Thank you, Governor, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and an honor to join this distinguished group of specialists. And I must say at the outset that I am by no means an expert of any sort in all things cybernetic. My husband rather is, and he sort of looks after that side of it in our family, in our daily affairs. And I think that in most families today, what we frequently find is that acquaintance with the modern electronic means of communication is highest among some members of the family, but particularly the youngest ones. We have a grandson that just turned 4 a few days ago, and I have a feeling that he was practically weaned on an iPad, and truly his favorite toy is this new medium of communication. The topic that will be of concern next year, but that is already starting to concern you here in the Boston Global Forum, of cyber terrorism and cyber crime takes various forms. You open your daily newspaper, and this morning, for instance, you would see a headline saying that 75 million people's accounts had been compromised by a cyber attack on the files, on the records of that large institution. And it's clear that if your bank account and access to it comes in the wrong hands, this is very bad news for any individual involved. But when you multiply that by not just the original million that the company admitted, but by 75 million, you realize the enormity of the harm that could be done. But we have also had cyber attacks already on countries that have been traced back to other countries, which obviously are not, don't have the friendliest of intentions, to put it mildly. Therefore, security, in the broadest sense of the word, for any system of government data keeping, of records, but also for very ordinary things of ordinary life, which have become part of our society, and on which we rely to operate properly. Any one of them, be it your airplane reservation or the way your airplane is being piloted, that are potential targets of terrorist attacks. But I'd like to mention that there's another aspect of availability of information in the cyberspace, if you like, and that is the recruitment of potential terrorists by spreading ideologies that by devious means first attract the attention of young people, then slowly suck them into activities, groups that are, it's almost like the brainwashing that one gets in sects. They get a feeling of being received in a friendly manner, of being found important, of being supported. I have been told by priests, for instance, in Paris suburbs, that in their attempts to get youngsters to come to church, they are competing with mullahs who offer 10 euros to every youngster who comes to Friday prayers. And for youngsters from disadvantaged neighborhoods, this is a very simple and ordinary temptation, which can then eventually lead to recruitment, to belonging in groups that not only have very fanatical convictions and ideologies, but that consider violence and random violence, which is what terrorism is, as a tool of preference for advancing their ideological needs. Then, of course, there's purely technical side. If you wish to do harm on a random and massive scale, the technical expertise required to do that varies. It can range from the extremely simple to the complicated, and it's a bit alarming to see on the internet, for instance, that there are recipes freely available for fabricating Molotov cocktails. There are recipes available for synthesizing drugs in your basement or in your kitchen. Drugs which, moreover, because of their chemical structure, have a few atoms that are not the same as those that are on lists of illegal substances, and therefore for a while can actually freely be put on the market, and frequently because of the way they're being manufactured or because of their actual physiological effects, are extremely dangerous to, say, teenagers of high school age, to whom these are freely distributed at a very low price, with a promise either of ecstasy or of a unique experience. And this is, in many ways, the downside, or the flip side, if you like, of having available to us in cyberspace through various means, through various dictionaries, by now, maybe not the complete knowledge of everything that humanity has ever acquired, but pretty close to it. And if in the ancient days the Library of Alexandria and its scrolls and its tablets was a repository for all that humankind had achieved up to that point, we must remember the sad lessons of history, where the Library of Alexandria was attacked and vandalized, and the Serapeum equally destroyed utterly by either one persuasion of fanatics or another. I say this because I have the privilege of being a part of the International Advisory Board of the Library of Alexandria, and Alexandria as a city is extremely proud of having, with international collaboration and support, reconstructed that historical monument to humanity's thirst for knowledge, and made it a beautiful center of international intellectual collaboration and activity. But the repository, this, if you like, the digital repository of the world's knowledge today, is in many ways as vulnerable as any one particular location where it might be deposited. The Library of Congress is, after all, unique. You may digitalize, and that's something that will help. You have a backup. But the original documents are irreplaceable. We just completed in Latvia our national library, a new building by world-famous Latvian architect who has been an American citizen for the last decades, Mr. Birkerts. And this library possesses irreplaceable incunabula, which, if they were to perish, well, we would have their digital traces, but we would not have the originals. I'd like to address another aspect of the cyberspace, and that is the general information that we get available to us, not just, say, the words to a song that you particularly liked when you were 20, and you remember how the words to the third verse or third stanza of it, and you can instantly look it up on the internet, or who was the actor who played the leading role in some movie that you remember. If the movie happens to be Casablanca, you probably don't need any kind of cyber support for it, but otherwise it's available at the tip of your fingers. But when it comes to information that is not simply factual and straightforward, but that requires inevitably some aspect of selection and interpretation to it, then I think we come up against potential dangers, not just of terrorism, but of extremism, of fanaticism, of racial hatred, of general aggressivity of one group of individuals against another, mischief, if you like, on a very large scale. The propaganda, the political propaganda that we consider as a natural part of the democratic multi-party system can take a nasty turn when it becomes a single source of information about the political situation in one's country and the world on the part of totalitarian systems. Any totalitarian system in the past has always managed to control the flow of information available to its citizens. The flow of information, control of information, is one of the means of imposing one's will, and it's a sort of terror, even if it is committed in the name of the state or of the ruling regime. The ability of citizens to evaluate things for themselves is a dangerous one to totalitarian systems, but it's also one that free countries and democratic countries, or countries in transition, should remember puts a heavy burden on the ordinary citizen. I had the privilege of chairing a committee on the freedom and diversity of the media in the European Union, and we produced a report that was deposited a couple of years ago, and we discovered that the plurality of media, the availability of diverse viewpoints and opinions, is not as simple a matter as it might seem, and it's not necessarily as easily achieved as we assume that if there are free elections in a country and if it has all the trappings of democracy, that thereby all its citizens are able to function, if you like, with the full powers and decision-making authority that democracy on principle affords to each and every citizen. It is very clear that media are the way by which the ordinary citizen has a window on the world. Nobody can be present everywhere at once. Nobody can witness important events personally. You're lucky if you sometimes see them at a distance. The media are truly deserving of their name, that they are the medium by which information flows. And the technical infrastructures of media, it will be the print medium or the electronic medium. In a way, the technicalities become secondary to the fact of the editorial choice, the editorial content of what is presented to the public. This, I believe, is an important issue that has to be addressed equally in all countries, regardless of the level of democratic freedoms that they enjoy. In those countries that see themselves as free, open, and democratic, vigilance, I think, is the order of the day. One should remain vigilant about maintaining a diversity of opinions available, a diversity of sources of information, and no human being having the privilege of claiming to have the absolute truth at their disposal and the absolute ultimate verities to present to you. One should do so with all due humility and allow for other viewpoints to be expressed. But what is truly alarming is that in many countries which are making progress, for instance in economic terms, which are like China, lifting millions out of dire poverty, the desire to control information on the part of governments remains as strong as ever, And we see also recently the Russian president announcing that they are going to take measures to have special servers for information that pertains to Russia. The argumentation for it is presented in the name of security and national security, and of course this is to some extent a legitimate concern for any country, the security of the information concerning its own internal affairs, but it very quickly can become an instrument of political control and an instrument of keeping people in the dark about what is happening. We hear that on mainland China, for instance, the media have been completely silent about the demonstrations happening in Hong Kong. Now, you might say the news, the daily news, can only report so much information. If you open any channel in America, you may object to the narrowness of the range of topics that it presents to your attention. And I suppose that the Chinese might make equal claims and say, well, some people gathering on the street is not newsworthy enough to deserve a place on our national news. But you can clearly see what the political implications are of this sort of choices, so that, you see, we have here a situation where the technical infrastructure of media, which in some ways is subsidiary, it is secondary to the content, to the editorial approach, to the choice and the viewpoint that you're going to present. But then we come full circle, because if somebody comes up with a new device, somebody invents a way of circumventing, say, the firewalls that some country has built around its internet, or the controls that it has imposed on its media, I think that there would be a wonderful opportunity, not just for somebody to make a fortune, but for the people concerned as its customers to have new opportunities for exercising their God-given right to actually pick and choose what it is they think about certain events in the world, and where they really, we would consider it as part of democratic rights that people should have the right of access to information that is as broad, as diversified, and as objective as possible. But I have had journalists, professional journalists from well-respected international television companies admit to me that even if you go, for instance, on Tahrir Square, as when there used to be these demonstrations in Cairo, your camera can only point in one direction. And that means that even in such a large event where 1 million people might be present, the scene that you choose to focus on, the face that you do put on your camera, is going to be one that you choose as operator of that camera, or later as editor of the news presentation. We have before us, ladies and gentlemen, unheard of and unlimited potentials for new access to information of the most unimaginable kind. This is a bonanza. It is, sometimes it seems overwhelming, but it's a wonderful privilege to have lived that long and to have experienced this immense explosion of information available to us. But at the same time, the challenges that it poses, the misuses, the potential misuses, clearly must be kept in mind. And so I think I have to conclude again with the same idea, that even as we are excited about the possibilities, we must remain extremely vigilant and careful about the dangers that such media can pose to human rights, to human freedoms, and to civil liberties in the largest sense of the word. Thank you very much for your attention.